And in some cultures, if you're talking about 3 people, you'd use one word for 3, and if you're talking about 3 cattle, you'd use a different word. Or if you're talking about 3 sticks, you'd use a different word again. That's really quite common. And for us, it's obvious you'd use the same word, but in fact, if you've just got used to looking at this configuration of people or animals or sticks and seeing it a certain way, you give that unity of that assemblage of things a single name. Why would you relate them? You'd only relate them if you abstract out the 3ness, you strip away the uniqueness of the thing that's being counted. And this is what the sort of Western mathematical project rooted in ancient Greek thinking has done, is extracted out or anything particular about what's being counted, and is just dealing with the numbers as pure tokens which can be manipulated as things in themselves. And the turning of the numbers on themselves is really at the next stage in that, where you're able to count 3s or 8s or something. And the absurdity of this act, or at least the innovation of this act, is something I'm trying to bring to the fore. And Conrad was sensing this, I think, and by discussing these animal terms, I gradually started to see what he was doing, because you can have a brace of rabbits. I'm still not sure if they can actually be alive. I think a brace of rabbits are usually dead rabbits, but that doesn't matter. I know that different cultures did have these words. So we have a brace of rabbits, but you can't have a brace of anything else, because the word is specific to rabbits. You have a brace of pheasant, that's true. Okay, brace of pheasant, brace of rabbit. But if you've got a lease of hawks, right, suppose there's a lease of hawks, and there's another one, but you can't have a brace of leases. A brace applies to specific animals, not to concepts. You can't have a brace of concept. And a lease is a concept, as is a brace. You can't have a brace of braces. You can only have a brace of rabbits or pheasants, or maybe some other...
So it's kind of like Conrad is coming from this reverse direction to the same point that you were coming to by this kind of very schematic model.
Yeah, I mean, so with this table, you've got these sort of these impossible, it's sort of, but they also kind of are quite primary in the sense that these things can't, they represent numbers. So you've got a hawk. Where is it? Like a hawk leased. You've got a hawk lease, or you've got the last. I can read. I can read it for you. But these, so you've got a leased brace hawk at the bottom, or a brace lease hawk. And then, so that represents 6 in the sort of old traditional number system. But a brace lease hawk is basically breaks down into a 2 and a 3 and a 1, and so it represents, they are the prime numbers. So like if you take any sort of big number, you can break it down into those primaries.
Ultimately, it would become so completely unwieldy, no one would ever have done it. The point is, no one ever did this. It's sort of showing that if you had a more earthy or rooted approach to number, and you did suddenly think, let's start combining these, let's start counting the numbers themselves, you'd end up with either these long, complicated, ridiculous sounding words, or you'd end up with this strange kind of, Conrad was imagining these like genetic mutant sort of combined rabbit, hawk, pig things, which,
Well, I suppose it was sort of like with the example of how 0 wasn't accepted by the Roman Catholic Church because it represented this unholy thing, and the idea of nothing was this the idea of hell, and it was the idea of Satan, but they also, the idea of 1 and a 0 meaning being more than 1 was also a sacrilegious idea. But they only accepted it because of money and because the capitalist system it couldn't add in Roman numerals as nearly as efficiently as it could in a decimal system. But just similarly, the idea of multiplication, if your system of numbers was based on these groups of animals, then you couldn't times a rabbit. You couldn't put a rabbit and a hawk together because you've got this unholy kind of animal that would be the stuff of nightmares.
Just to that point, Roman numbers are a bit like braces of leases of trios, aren't they? When you think about it, Arabic numbers kind of condense everything to...
the multiplication in Roman numbers is...
Yeah, we're trying to do fractions in Roman numerals, that's really difficult. Because you've got fives have their own thing going on, they suddenly become a V, and then suddenly you've got 10 of them and there's an X, and there's nothing in the numbers themselves that does that.
Could I just explain how it was told to me that these numbers were written down? That they came from hands, that you drew hands, so you had 1, 2, 3, 4, there's your 5, then you've got 5, 6, 7,
Okay,
8.
yeah,
Now you've got another V, but you don't want it to look like
So
that one,
do
so you
X,
put them like that.
yeah, okay, yeah.
That was how it was explained to
How
me,
the Roman
whether
numerals
that's
came back.
true,
Yeah, I mean, that
I don't
starts to
know.
get complicated when you get into sort of 50 and 100.
which
but-
is L.
Yeah, but even so, it's probably something like that. I mean, often counting does come back to something quite physiological, or something to do with, you know, encounters with the world at a very physical level. And mathematics has got as far away from that as it possibly can, and that's the world I'm coming from, but I'm still interested in where it came from.
Exactly what I was going to say. At this point in the process, you were kind of confronted. I mean, as you said, you're not an academic mathematician, and you're extremely open-minded in the way you think about numbers, and you pose a lot of questions in your book, which many academic mathematicians would simply not consider. But at this point, you were kind of being faced with these aspects of number, cultural aspects of number, and these kind of associations, which traditionally a mathematician would simply say irrelevant to mathematics. But I'm interested in hearing what was your experience of this process and the kind of unexpected consequences that came from taking these abstract concepts and bringing them down to this very concrete level, and making them into physical objects, and how that affected the way that you thought about these problems.
With this, do you mean in terms of what we created?
Yeah, and then just the whole process insofar as that, I suppose you could say there was this fork where there were unexpected consequences in terms of the imaginative associations which sprung from the way we were thinking about this problem. But there were also unexpected consequences which came from the sheer fact that we made this thing, which, you know, is kind of this clunky model that doesn't particularly work great and doesn't look like a work of art, but it works and it shows that it demonstrates the concept. So there are these two kind of sets of unexpected.
Yeah. It's easier to talk about the second one. I'm trying to think of anything concrete I can say about the first one. I mean, there was the small matter of the peanut, in the sense that we just grabbed something sort of that looked fairly unitary and solid to represent oneness. And then after a while, it's like, wow, the thing we've chosen is just like a perfect representation of two-ness. And the fact that there is no unity, anything ultimately that we want to name can be broken down into parts and has sub-components, so that when you try and physicalise the idea, there are always these things spinning out that you wouldn't have thought about, because a mathematician...
In that sense, we were discovering that part of what the artistic process is that you have to choose something in order to realise what you want to think about, and that material feeds back on what you do.
Yeah, it was the mathematical approach is just to bracket all of that stuff out, because it's just distracting. You just want to break everything down to its pure structural skeleton that is the same regardless of what you're counting. The whole point is it doesn't matter what you're counting. You know, if you're dealing with numbers or variables, x's and y's that represent those numbers, or even more abstract things which represent those, ultimately that can be sourced back to somebody counting their cattle, seemingly. But you're not supposed to be thinking about that. The cattle is supposed to have gone a long time ago, and you're just dealing with the structure itself. And because we were in a studio full of peanuts and cocktail sticks and zip ties and things, it kept getting brought back to these materials which Conrad would take and go off in a different direction with, and if I was prepared to follow that, would lead to some interesting insights sometimes. But when we actually tried to physicalise this assemblage of cameras and screens, it did lead to some unusual, unexpected questions about the nature of the relationship between addition and multiplication, which may not lead anywhere, but there's one question in particular that I would never have thought of had we not tried to build a model of this. So that's an unintended consequence of the dramatisation, whether it's art or not. But to explain what I mean by that, we'd have to have the thing in front of us, I think.
Okay, well, maybe we'll probably have a short break in a while. Maybe we'll bring it out afterwards when we have some more audience questions. I'd just like to, before we take a break, just reverse the question and then ask Conrad. Not that you necessarily had any very solid expectations of what was going to happen, because I don't think any of us did. But what were the kind of unexpected consequences of the way in which we set up this collaboration, or this